Hello. It's what date? It's January 2018, and I'm lost. And this is episode 85 of the Unseen Podcast. And this is your host, Paul Carr. And joining us on this recording are Adam Smith.
Hello.
And Nick Nielsen.
Hello, Paul, and hello, Unseen Podcast listeners.
And Patrick Festa.
Hello again. It's once in a blue moon, only the blue moon is coming this 31st.
Oh, you did sneak that in. Okay. And Buck Field.
Hello, everyone.
And so, slight adjustment there. Okay. And so, as your regular listeners probably know, about a month before each show, we started a thread to discuss what the topic of the show will be. In most cases, that topic is not fixed until the people in the Unseen Podcast community have a chance to talk about it, discuss it, kick it around a bit. We don't really do that great a job of converging on a particular seed topic, but we usually at least bring up some things that are of interest and have some potential controversy about them. We are not a news show. We are not a science education show. We don't really endeavor to fill you in on all the facts. Sometimes we try to do that, but most of the time that's not our mission. What we're trying to do is have that conversation about things that are current or interesting or future forward or, somebody shut me up. What are we talking about tonight?
The moon.
The moon. I've heard of that. That's that thing, right?
Yes, that almost planetary size object orbiting the Earth.
Oh, it orbits the Earth. Okay. In that case, it can't be that far away, right? There
238,000 miles. It's actually 27,000 miles closer in perigee.
Okay, but now, I think a lot of this discussion had to do with. By the way, I haven't getting an echo. Somebody put on their headphones, please. The question that I have is should we go back? As everybody knows, United States astronauts visited the moon. What was it? 6 times. Tried 7 times. Succeeded 6 times. In the late 1960s, early 1970s. Actually drove a buggy around on the moon, took some samples, came back. It was what a lot of people would call a flags and footprints sort of mission. And then nobody's been back since. Since then, Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, has passed away, as have a few other Apollo astronauts. Buzz Aldrin is still with us, the second man to set foot on the moon, very active and a busy fellow, but well into his 80s. And so the question arises, are we going to, before Buzz Aldrin dies, are we going to give him a chance to see more humans walk around the moon? They don't have to be necessarily Americans. What's going to happen? Anybody want to start this off?
To quote Carl Sagan, all civilizations become either spacefaring or extinct. So we have a simple choice. We either start getting off the Earth or we die out.
But spacefaring does not necessarily entail moon visiting or moon settlement.
Well, I would think that we should go back to the moon before we even think about sending people to Mars.
Why is that?
Well, there's a few reasons. I mean, for example, for one thing, it's closer. The other thing is it's sort of a practice run, And another thing is the research into finding ways of better radiation shielding can be done on the way to the moon and back. And they could learn a lot before they set off to Mars, where the radiation is going to be a much bigger problem.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the differences and the challenges, right? I mean, what's the worst thing about the moon?
It has no atmosphere.
Well, okay, but that's really Mars has a very thin atmosphere, but
well, I mean, it's usable. It could be processed.
Well, the worst thing about the moon, from my view, is that the nights are 14 days long. Right? I mean, 14 days, total darkness. Right? Now, for an astronomer, that would be heaven. Right?
As would the absence of an atmosphere. One could argue that that's the best about the moon.
Yeah, but I mean, astronomy we can do. We're making good progress to astronomy without spending well, I shouldn't say astronomical, without the huge amounts of money that would cost to actually put telescopes on the moon.
The costs would be lunar.
but the unique thing is the backside of the moon is radio silent, and that's a unique opportunity.
It's radio silent. It's also it's not radio silent all the time. When the sun is actually quite noisy from the radio, but the moon is got some fantastic capabilities for astronomy, but other things about it are not so great, like dust and
I had a
huge thermal gradients.
I had a tough time with your question about, what's the worst thing about my moon, because there's so many horrible things.
Oh, let's list a couple of them.
Yeah, well, give us a half dozen.
Yeah, the dust is supposed to be so thin; it's supposed to be finer than talcum powder.
Is the worry that the dust is going to get into machinery and destroy it?
Well, I think that's an engineering problem that's easy to solve, right? But if you're talking about astronomical instruments, that's another problem, right?
Well, if you build your astronomical instruments and then just set them down in a vacuum on the far side of the moon, you'll disturb some dust and it'll immediately fall back to the surface. Unless anybody comes around, it's not going to get kicked up.
Well, the
again,
problem is it will get kicked up again. It gets kicked up when the sun rises, and also when the sun sets.
Is that from electrostatics, or what is it?
Yeah, a combination of that and just solar wind, and there's a lot of. I mean, we really haven't studied the lunar dust sufficiently yet, in my view. There have been proposals to do that have not gotten through the budgeting process, but in fact, I worked on one of those proposals, but. The fact is that the lunar dust is not very well understood yet, and so that would have to be characterized, understood, and then you have to do the engineering to. I mean, it might just be as simple as covers. I don't know. Nobody really knows what the answer is.
Well, isn't Mars dust just as bad?
No, because Mars has some atmosphere, and Mars has a much shorter day, and Mars has there is dust, but it really comes in big storms and deposits. But nobody's talking about Mars as a primo site for astronomy. So
although arguably a telescope on the top of Olympus Mons would have very little atmosphere between itself and space.
At the bottom of Olympus Mons, it has very little atmosphere. I mean, it's better than Mauna Kea from that point of view. But but the problem with it costs so much more to get stuff to Mars that astronomical instruments would not be a high priority.
What's the problem with a 14-day and night cycle?
Well, the problem is that you have 14 days of night, right? No energy input, extreme cold. And
I don't know. It's pretty extremely cold now here. It's 10 degrees outside.
Oh, you think that's cold, do you? Yeah, keep dreaming. Yeah, much colder. I mean, you're basically, you have a surface that's exposed to, the 3 degrees Kelvin of cold space for 14 days. It's going to get very, very cold. And just even on the sunlit side, the things that are on shadow get very cold very fast because there's no atmosphere to move the heat around. So that's a problem and something you have to address. And then for 14 days, you get to harvest that solar energy, and you get to, you have light. You can move around. There's a lot of discussion that you're probably going to find more water near the poles of the moon. So there'd be a lot of emphasis on getting to the poles. And in fact, the Chinese are interested in this as well as other people. So,
wasn't there recently found that there's like a system of tunnels or caverns?
Well, there are lava tubes, which are known to exist, but we don't know much about them. We don't know what's really under there.
I mean, well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm mentioning it, because wouldn't it be worth it to go there just to investigate those lava tubes?
Well, you don't really need people to do that, but yeah, I think a lot of people would like to see the lava tubes studied. At least the entrance. Know something about the entrance to lava tubes, like how far out how close to the entrance could you put heavy equipment without it falling down, things like that. What would be the best procedure for actually lowering things into the tube?
It's the Marius Hill skylight, probably the best target, an entrance into what's thought to be a lava tube, which is thought to be around 100 meters wide, and may well go on for hundreds of miles. We don't know.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, we don't really know in detail. I mean, we've never flown a radar over the moon, that could get that kind of information. You also could put a LiDAR over there that would allow you to at least figure out what's around the hole.
Robotic mission, definitely.
Yeah. It would be much, much cheaper to launch, say, a synthetic aperture radar than it would be to put people on the ground and have them very carefully move towards that hole and figure out.
But the latter would be much more exciting and get much more television views.
Yeah, it might be the president saying we just lost 5 astronauts who
spelunking on the moon.
Who got too close to the edge without and crashed through it and died.
So these lava tubes are vertical, kind of like.
No, they're probably they have vertical entrances, but they have
the skylights. The skylights are vertical, but they extend horizontally under their surface, and they're believed to be quite large in places, like several kilometers across, so larger than terrestrial lava tubes.
Yeah, and Mars has tubes like that too, by the way. But
how was the evidence of these tubes? Where does it come from?
There's a photograph of one of the skylights, quite a good photograph of one of the skylights.
We have really good photographs of pretty much the entire lunar surface now, from Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter as well as other missions. Very, very detailed, high-res stuff.
Of the surface.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm on board with that. But lava tubes that go perhaps hundreds of miles and are 100 meters.
Well, we don't
across.
really know how big the lava tubes are, or how.
But what's the evidence?
Well,
what
you can see that you can see features on the ground that indicate there's a tube underneath, but it's mostly just these big holes which drop down in there, which indicate that there was some kind of material that flowed through there and then created a tunnel. And so it's kind of an inference from the fact that we know that there's been some volcanism on the moon, and that was a very long time ago. It hasn't been recent, but
thanks for that link, Nick.
Yeah,
but there's a you can find these holes and you find them on Mars too, and Mars the lava tubes are a little more obvious, but you can definitely see the holes. The holes tell you, there's a tunnel down there. You wouldn't just get like a whole hole. You would have to be something, that flowed through there and created that space. So,
So it looks like it says gravity, that there's gravity data that they're kind of interpreting. It sounds a little Rorschach-y.
Well, there's very good gravity data, and you can't really tell by the images. You have to actually do the analysis, but yeah. The gravity data, there was a lot of people kind of missed the what was it, the Grail mission?
Yes, it was the Grail. I was about to ask you what the name of that mission was. They finally crashed them, didn't they?
Yeah. They didn't. I mean, they pretty much were done. They had taken all the data they could take, but the Grail mission, which wasn't, didn't take any images, so it didn't get a lot of public attention. But my goodness, they took tremendous amounts of gravity data on the moon, and they have a very detailed gravity map.
The whole mission was for gravity. It was the Grail stands for gravity reconnaissance something or other.
Gravity recovery. And so you'll see these holes, and they do indicate that there are tubes. Nobody really has explored the tubes. Nobody really has any direct data on the tubes. So that could be a whole campaign in itself. But the tubes looks like a great place to hide a colony if you want to get out of the radiation, out of the thermal fluxes that you get, and there are probably a lot of them, and that's the sort of thing that could take many years to figure out. But really, what you need to do is just know where one is, and have a good strategy for getting into it. Yeah.
So there's the intrinsic scientific interest in exploring the lava tubes, and also their potential as a shielded, stable place that could be a lunar settlement.
Which is a good convergence. I mean, you can always get the geologist to argue, we need to go down these tubes and figure out what's in those tubes, and then you can get, for scientific reasons, and then you can get people who are more interested in settlement say, if we get it down to those, if those tubes turn out to be good places for us to go, and we have a smart way of getting down there with all our equipment, then we could put all our heavy stuff down in the tubes, and we could shelter in the tubes, and then we could come up out of the tubes and explore the surface and mine the surface and so on. However, you don't. Say again.
In terms of geology, the Apollo mission barely scratched the surface of the moon.
Oh yeah.
We still know very little about the moon.
But it's one of it's the only celestial body outside the Earth that we have significant samples from.
Sure.
But so we know more about it than we do Mars, but still.
Yeah, well, 6 flags, 12 sets of footprints in an area bigger than both northern and southern American continents. It's like
it's not
6
much
camping trips. What would you learn from 6 camping trips about the whole of the North and South American continent? Not a lot.
Well, just where Bigfoot is, that's about it.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, hence the argument for the intrinsic scientific value of returning to the moon. There's no question we'd learn a lot. The question is, what structure is near-term human space exploration going to take? And that's not at all clear at this point, because as we were talking before this got started, a lot of space agencies are talking about the moon, but no nation state is ponying up the billions that would be required to go there, or to Mars for that matter.
Well, I think the Chinese actually do have a fairly realistic and fairly not too ambitious plan. As does India. The Chinese do want to send people ultimately. I don't think they're quite ready to do that, but
it's so expensive to haul us anywhere.
Well, meat bags are generally tricky to move around in space.
I mean, we are high maintenance.
Well,
but we learned something from that process too. Maintaining human life in adverse environments is something you can learn a lot, both about human health and about maintaining an ecosystem.
Right. But you can do that sort of thing. We have the underwater stuff. We have the Antarctic. We have the the experiment they've done in Hawaii.
But there's always a temptation to fudge in those experiments. If you were in a crater in the moon, there would be no fudging. You would be alive or you would be dead.
That's true, and there's no plan B.
Well, there could be rescue resources in place. There could be plenty of plan Bs. You could, before you put people down, whether on the moon or Mars, you could put spare rockets down there. You could put spare supplies. Obviously the SpaceX. Go ahead.
Duct tape.
Lots of duct tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Duct tape.
A machine shop.
Well,
that was one of the proposals for Apollo when they were formulating the high level mission specs and how they wanted to get somebody onto the moon, and they were trying to decide, should they send everything up in one gigantic rocket? Should they do Earth orbit rendezvous? Should they do lunar orbit rendezvous? And then there was actually a lunar surface rendezvous that was proposed, where a series of launches would take supplies to the moon, and then when the astronauts got there, everything that they needed would be waiting for them.
Yeah.
Which is close to the mission design for SpaceX's Mars mission, which is based largely on Zubrin's book on going to Mars. So the whole point of Zubrin's book, which is largely taken over, like I said, by Elon Musk and SpaceX, is a minimal infrastructure. You build a rocket, it takes stuff to Mars, it dumps stuff on Mars. You don't build space stations along the way or anything. You just dump all the supplies there, and then you bring people there, and then they make a settlement there. So this is a mission design that's specifically conceived around the idea of not building any space-based infrastructure, just getting there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean that's the raison d'être, as it were, of the Zubrin / Musk Mars initiative.
And it makes a lot of sense to me to send an uncrewed mission to Mars first, with a whole lot of infrastructural sort of supplies, and then you land quite close to that, and your next one of the real strengths of the SpaceX architecture is they can land pretty much exactly where they want. They are not. They do not have this big landing ellipse like you do with the JPL robotic missions, where you might land within a few hundred kilometers. They can put it down right where they want it, and so they can land, within tens of meters of where the supply depot is, and that would be, and in that intervening time, they can have rovers out. They can be looking around. They can establish what the challenges and the resources are, and things like cliffs, which are potentially a really good place to create a habitat, or other types of natural formations that might serve as shelter.
Sort of like a Martian Anasazi dwelling.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of people have been advocating cliffs for radiation shielding and for easy access to the surface. In the National Geographic fictional Mars program, they had them going down into a lava tube, where they struck water.
Are there any actual photographs of skylights to Martian lava tubes?
Yeah, there are. Yes, quite a few.
I haven't seen those. I've seen several pictures of the lunar lava tubes.
Well, there are these big pits, which
believed to be. Right?
Yeah, and nothing underneath there except darkness. So it's almost certainly the same thing. We know there's been a huge amount of volcanism on Mars. Not at present. It's extremely weak, but over the eons, there's been a lot of volcanism. You find cinder cones everywhere. So there should be lava tubes. And in fact, that's what the Spirit rover found when it landed first, was just lava everywhere. Lava. Huge chunks of it. So Spirit eventually did end up finding some more interesting stuff, but that's what they found at first. But there are lava tubes on Mars where it's possible, but the problem with that is you have to have everything you need to get down into the tube and get back up out of the tube.
It's in a couple of
definitely, it would require infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, and there's the whole question of how far out towards the edge of the tube can you get before you're going to collapse that entrance? Yeah,
it's in a couple of mountains.
Yeah, well, that's why cliffs seem a lot more low risk in a lot of ways.
Much more prudent to practice on the moon, I think, and much cheaper, much easier to get there. It
is true. It's much cheaper to get to the moon. The same amount of mass.
Mars,
yeah.
With Mars, you only have a 1 week launch window open every 2
Oh,
years.
no, it's a bit more than 1 week, but
well, it's not much.
That's assuming you're going to use a gravitational trajectory and not that much boost. Which is that's the way things can be done with current technology. But if you're willing to spend the resources and the fuel, you can get there quicker.
A lot of what we've sent to Mars so far has been limited by the launch vehicle, and so it's you can't you have to use a fairly narrow window. Usually it's, I think, if I recall correctly, it's about 2 or 3 weeks. And it depends on, what that launch vehicle can give you in terms of tweaking the transfer orbit. But the
launch vehicles that NASA has today they're built around the assumptions of the relatively low cost space science missions. And so they can boost something up and they can send it almost anywhere in the solar system. And because there are no human beings on it, it's okay if it takes several years to get there. We're going to get the information eventually when it radios it back. If there had been a focus on human missions, we would have big, huge launch vehicles that could take big, huge cargoes into your orbit, which could include both the things that would sustain human beings as well as big honking rockets that could get us there more quickly, so we didn't have to spend 6 months.
Well, the problem with the big rocket is that the mass budget is quickly going to get sucked up by all the payload you need to take, and then you're going to have to back up to a smaller window again. But that's just the way things like that work. I mean, Apollo initially had a huge mass problem. They put out a bounty on mass. They said, we will pay you money if you can. I can't remember what it was, $100 a pound or something like that. If you can figure out a way we can cut mass back, and they eventually did. They were actually really successful ultimately, but at some point in the Apollo planning program, they had a very significant mass deficit, and they had to. So they really had nothing left to no luxury at all. It was just trying to get it all up there. Eventually, they ended up taking a golf club, and I don't know.
Not to have controversy with Nick, but actually, it took a lot longer. It took a week for Apollo to get to the moon.
About 4 days, I think.
But
I got that question wrong. They're great.
New Horizons whizzed by the moon in 8 hours. So,
yeah, but New Horizons was a tiny little thing.
I know. I'm just saying. As far as unmanned versus manned spacecraft going faster or slower to get there, it was actually the other way around for at least one of them.
Well, but there's a trade-off between how much mass you need, and now I should point out that New Horizons flew on the biggest expendable launch vehicle the U.S. could provide at the time, which was the Atlas V Heavy, and it was. It's no longer It's no longer. Now the Falcon is bigger, but and the Falcon Heavy will be much bigger which is scheduled to launch this month for a demo mission. But that and the New Horizons was a little itty bitty spacecraft you could put on a tabletop.
Plus, it wasn't going to land anywhere on the moon. It was going to whiz right by it. I think it was a gravity assist or something.
Well, no, not even gravity assist. Just whiz by it. There was a Jupiter gravity assist for that, but not.
Well, anyway, it was just designed to whiz by. Get to Pluto as fast as it can.
It would, 9 years.
Yeah.
9.5 years.
I mean, the difference between 8 hours and like 4 or 5 days is it's huge.
Yes, that's true, but that's not really relevant because nobody would go to the moon. If you were going to the moon, you wouldn't go that fast because when you get there, you have to stop.
Right, you have to slow down.
So you wouldn't drag race down your driveway. You would.
So your teenager might drag race down your driveway.
Don't give her ideas.
And they would use up brakes. If you're going to race to your target, you have to be ready to have your retro rockets slow you down when you get there.
Yeah, and
you're going to burn more fuel.
Yeah, and also you're gonna have if we're going to drop something on the moon that's so significant, it's going to be a lot more massive, and so and there's no atmosphere to slow us down. We can't use that at all. So
If you adopt the mission architecture more or less like the Zubrin Mars architecture, and you send a bunch of stuff there first, that can go there as slow as you like, and you can send big, heavy cargoes on the most efficient trajectory you can possibly imagine or figure out, and then the only thing you want to do quickly is get the human beings there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think that's nobody disagrees with that. The question is, now, the problem they've had with the Mars architecture is that you need a launch vehicle that doesn't cost, the entire NASA budget for 1 year to build it and launch it. You have to understand the NASA budget has not really grown much in 30 years. It's like
that's why I say they've gotten very good at making small science probes that operate on a very low budget and return an enormous amount of science information. And it's a question of whether a space agency that has become accustomed to doing that should even be talking about going to Mars or going to the moon when there's no budget and Congress is not likely to vote a budget for this. Why don't they just stick to space science?
Well, there's usually one or two big things going on at NASA and then a whole bunch of smaller things. Right now, the big thing is, of course, the space station, which costs an enormous amount of money just to maintain, and then there's the James Webb Space Telescope, which hopefully will launch next year. After that,
why hopefully?
Well, it's delays after delay after delay.
It was supposed to originally launch in 2013. Now its target date is 2019. And
not only that, but it's the sort of thing that you would not launch until it's completely 100% ready. It's not, it's faster, better, cheaper, pick any two. Well, with a flagship mission like James Webb, it's just better. Forget about faster, forget about cheaper, just go with better. Because there's no point in launching anything that's not better. So, the schedule is the thing that's easier to relax in cost. And, so they relax schedule, And
yeah, indeed. And when you relax the schedule, you've got more years of budget to pay for that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you still have to go back hat in hand to Congress and say, yeah, we kind of overran a little bit because of the marching army. But
is it true or is it not true that they're more likely to keep funding something that's just on the verge of being ready than cut it loose and say, no, we poured enough money down that road?
That is true. And the sunk cost fallacy has no weight in congressional deliberations. If we spend all this money so far, we got to go through with it. So, but in reality, I mean, it's going to be a great instrument.
Yeah, the space science that will be returned by that is I can't wait for it.
It will be a significant improvement over Hubble in a lot of areas, and given that it's successful, and so that it will be, but that's eating the money this year. Now, in a couple of years, it will be down to an operational budget, which will be much smaller. And then there will be the next big thing. Space station is supposed to be retired in 2024, but I really don't know if that's going to happen or not. They'll probably get pushed out by at least a couple of years. And then there's other big things like the Space Launch System, this big expensive rocket that they're working on right now, which might have a launch rate of 1 a year and might cost, if they're lucky, $2 billion to launch in the full configuration. So that's kind of like the space shuttle in terms of
the Senate launch system.
The Senate launch system,
lots of employment in lots of congressional districts.
Well, that's exactly how these things happen.
Unfortunately, we either talked about it online or in a previous podcast. There was Eric Berger who writes a lot of contemporary space stories. I can't remember it's
he's got a podcast called "Are We There Yet?"
Yeah, he wrote a great thing on article about the SLS and its political implications, and it's enough to make you really roll your eyes, if not worse. This is the nature of a government entity that is deeply mired in inertia and bureaucracy and risk aversion, which are not necessarily bad things. You don't want to throw people's lives away, but they're not necessarily the way private enterprise would approach it, if there would be any way that private enterprise could approach it, which we were discussing before we went on there.
I mean, there's no way NASA can say we are going to risk the lives of astronauts, but the reality is you are risking the lives of astronauts, but they just can't say that publicly, right? So, but if you say we're not risking the lives of astronauts, then you have to go through this enormous expense. It's kind of engineering theater to man rate everything and get everything as low risk as possible. But the cost and schedule delays are huge. Whereas if you have someone who can just say, look, who's willing to take a defined risk to be an astronaut and go to the Mars or to the moon, and you'll get lots of hands going up. And as long as you're honest about what the risks are, and we found that I don't think the Mars, Mars One thing is ever going to happen, but the fact they got a lot of well qualified young people to show up for it and say, yeah, we want to do this, it might happen in some other form. Probably not that organization, but that's the sort of thing that Elon Musk is trying to get to. He's not going to say, look, if you go to Mars with me, you're 100% chance you're going to survive and come home. He's probably going to say more like, it's a little iffy that you'll live to be 80 and, you might actually die on impact. And frankly, you're not going to ever go home. And at least you should assume you're not ever going to go home. That's very different from what NASA will tell people.
Yeah. And you would still have volunteers.
Oh, you'll have thousands of volunteers.
And if you were paying people 6-figure salaries, you'd get enormous number of people who would be willing to sign on.
Yeah, well, six-figure salary is not such a big deal
If
anymore.
if it were a job in an industry, they were actually producing a profit and selling widgets of some sort, then that would be possible.
That's what they would. I mean,
well, coal miners
Mars
took tremendous risks to dig coal for well less than six figures, right?
Yeah.
Farming is a dangerous profession.
That's true. It's very dangerous. Logging is a very dangerous profession.
Logging is, and these guys aren't making a lot of money, so the notion and people used to risk not only themselves but their families to come, across the Atlantic to get farmland or
soldiers go to war for a lot less than six figures.
Oh yeah, and for no particular reason. I mean,
it's because they're well. Let me tell you what it's not. It's not because their situation at home was so great.
Well, yeah,
that's true. That's many people entered the military throughout history as a means of escape, because when you join the army, you don't have to plow.
Well, and you get paid.
And you get paid. And you
get killed.
Some of you get killed.
Yeah. And well, I mean, war, even for the ones that survived, war was pretty miserable. But, I guess a lot of young people don't see the risk. They just say, well, okay, I'm going to go see some exotic places and wear some nice clothes and get fed every day.
Well, it's not much talked about because it's sort of a verboten subject matter. But some people love war, and some people love fighting and killing. And there's a certain literature. If you go digging for it, you can find it. And in the final episode of the great BBC, the best documentary ever made is the BBC's World at War. And in the very last one, they interview a few people who talked about how it was the greatest thing that ever happened to them. We don't talk about that much anymore, but some people do experience.
Well, that's a certain amount of survivor bias there, though, right?
Right, absolutely. There's survivor, but you would find the same people who took great risks to do any grand project like going to the moon or Mars. I mean, if anybody were to do that as a young person, that would be the biggest thing in their life. Like in 1917, for an American kid from the Midwest to get sent on a ship to Paris, and how do you keep them on the farm once they've seen Paris? That changes your life forever, and it becomes the defining moment of your life.
Yeah.
Just as space travel would be.
One of those young soldiers was actually Edwin Hubble, who was very terribly disappointed. He never really got to see any serious combat.
But he took shrapnel, and he did get injured.
I think it was that bad.
Not that bad, but he did get injured. Yeah, I mean, and from shrapnel, not from some accident.
But that's
Getting back to the moon.
that's pretty lucky for him that he didn't see serious combat, because a lot of soldiers on the front lines were, it was pretty much a guaranteed way of getting shot at. But
yeah, carnage of the First World War was unparalleled.
Getting back to the moon, I think it would be a prudent thing to do to go there and even set up like science labs and stuff. Maybe even being able to, once we investigate those tubes, maybe even being able to use those as the laboratory housing or something to that effect. But set up various labs and use the moon as a space laboratory. Sort of.
Yeah, but why not do that with robots?
Because you can't do it with robots, but you can with humans.
Because
I mean, yes, I'm all for sending robots all over the place, but there's certain times where you just have to have the hands on. A human being can investigate and do experiments in minutes or maybe hours in comparison to what it takes a robot to do in days, sometimes even weeks.
would we have the evidence of global warming and the ozone hole if we only sent robots to the South Pole? Humans are much better at.
Well, the ozone hole was actually discovered by, was discovered not by humans. So.
Sure, but it's been monitored from the South Pole, Amundsen Scott base, since the 80s by people.
Well, we've had since the total ozone measuring spectrometer in the 80s. We've been monitoring space. But
the robot was the tool or the sensor of sorts, and the people have to monitor it. It was still done by people. It's more or less an instrument, like you would use a microscope, for example, to.
By the way, we do have one live viewer. If you have any questions or comments, chime in the chat, and Adam is watching. So
that might be me. I'm on there too because I was.
Oh, okay. That's probably Patrick. You have any questions or comments? I'll be right back.
I would like to see a lunar base very similar to the South Pole Antarctica base. That's the sort of thing I think we should have on the moon. And there are some good economic reasons for going to the moon and establishing a lunar economy.
Even if we start off with a science lab, that would be a base anyway.
Yeah, there's water, as Paul said earlier, that we can make rocket fuel out of, and there's a lot of helium-3, which is extremely rare.
Oh, that's right.
On the Earth,
the soil or the dirt or the dust or whatever contains helium-3.
Yeah, so there are some good economic reasons for going to the moon, and mining, as well as sound scientific reasons.
Okay, so what's the economic pitch?
More land. There's no more land on the surface of Earth. It's all spoken for, basically. And there's going to be less of it as the oceans rise.
Okay, so but that's not really
Lebensraum.
What's that?
Lebensraum. Living space.
Well, I mean, it's practice run. It's preparing to leave Earth. In order for people to leave Earth, it's preparing for disaster, for example.
Well, I agree with that, but it's not. I agree with that, and I'm inspired by that, but it doesn't seem like an economic justification for anything.
It's not. Admittedly, it's not an economic justification. But if the moon could be developed to the point that it could survive a catastrophe that befell the Earth, and it becomes a second center of human civilization, then if something horrible happens on the Earth, whether it be a pandemic or a strike, some body, and then the moon is the only thing that survives, that would be extremely valuable. It's hard to, how do you put existential risk mitigation into an economic calculation? Say you spend billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to create a human presence that's self-sustaining somewhere else in the solar system, whether it's on the Mars or moon or in orbit, doesn't really matter. And nothing happens. Is that money wasted because you assured yourself against an existential risk? I would argue that it's not, but so few people look at existential risk through this big picture perspective that it's very difficult to persuade people that it's worthwhile to spend this money, just because money would be worth zero if the Earth gets wiped out, or the human population on Earth, or even if just civilization on Earth gets wiped out. If there's a huge coronal mass ejection that shorts out all the electronic grids across, the half of the planet exposed to the sun when it goes off, and probably the rest of the grid would be taken down by that, event as well. I mean, it might be reparable on half of the planet. Still, if you've got assets elsewhere in the solar system, you're going to be able to survive that. And how do you put a price on that? So, a moon settlement might not produce profit in that sense, but as a source of existential risk mitigation, it has an economic value. Does that make sense?
Well, my sense is that we ought to pick one to say, well, you can't put a price on it. On the other hand, it has some economic value. To me, seems like wanting to have it both ways.
No, but you're trying to choose one thing, or you're trying to choose one reason to go, and basically what we've all just been talking about was there's millions of reasons to go.
Well, I want to take them one at a time. And when someone says there's an economic reason for this, then I want to say, okay, well, what is that?
One of the reasons, one of the million reasons, is the ability to go somewhere, and in order to have that ability, we have to sort of practice and sort of go there and see what we can do. And it may take decades, but in the meantime, we have this climate change going on, and there's going to be things happening here, and we need to, to send out the feelers. We need to send out many different ways of dealing with this.
And I agree with that. But what I am saying is that
would be economic.
When you
that would be
okay.
Because like Nick was saying, the possibilities of disaster happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's definitely going to happen, but there is financial reason to go. I mean, there's the survival of the human race, for one thing.
Okay, but that's not, the survival thing is not really an economic reason.
Well, it would be if it saves something of economic value that would be lost otherwise. I don't know how to put this in conventional economic terms,
mm-hmm.
but if civilization or human life is destroyed on Earth, then all the money you've got and all the assets you've got become, are worth nothing, and that's a huge economic loss, obviously. If your upfront investment of a few $1 trillion in a second center of human civilization that can survive something that goes off on Earth allows you to keep something of value so you don't have that total loss, then that has an economic value as I see it.
Yeah.
Would you say if you spent $1,000 a month on an insurance policy and you don't get sick, is the money wasted?
That most people would say no. From a personal perspective, I don't have insurance because I hate that feeling of losing money. But when I look at it from the perspective of the whole of civilization, is it worth a few $1 trillion to purchase insurance for civilization? I would say yes.
Okay, and you think that okay, well. So how could I or someone who's undecided get to that point of the kind of certainty you have?
That's something I've thought about literally for most of my life. How can you reach people who don't think in these terms? When you talk to people about climate change, and they only talk about things that never get you off the surface of the planet. They don't even think about, we could cool the planet down just by putting a little shade in between the Earth and the sun, and all the other kind of space-based solutions you could have, if not solutions, at least engineering mitigation that would be entirely reversible and things like that. Because a lot of people just refuse to entertain stuff like that, or they'll say, well, that's science fiction. We need to talk about real problems things we can really do. So there's the giggle factor that's always involved when you talk about space.
Well, there are people like that, but I don't think I'm one of them.
No, I'm not suggesting you are.
Okay, but it sounds like you're presenting this as, instead of like sharing reasons that would help convince someone who wants to be convinced. I mean, I agree that there are ideologues and that they will not be convinced.
Right.
But
okay.
That doesn't really help me.
Intelligent people who are on the fence. Well, I think the only way you can do it is take those people one at a time and understand where they're coming from and try to emphasize to them that there is a value in continuing the human enterprise and civilization.
Okay, and I am convinced of that.
Surely the main economic reason is rocket fuel. Making rocket fuel, that's going to be game changing. If SpaceX or any other private enterprise can successfully turn water into oxygen and hydrogen,
mm-hmm.
and use it as rocket fuel,
mm-hmm.
that's going to be completely game changing for then pushing on into the rest of the solar system.
Yeah.
So we have a plausible road to do that economically?
there's the mining ideas. For example, again, going back to the practice runs, sooner or later we're going to want to try and perhaps mine some asteroids and stuff. In order to get the expertise to do that, you go someplace like the moon and practice, how to go about doing things. Just the
learning
of going there or sending up rockets and stuff is already, you're trying something new. You're trying new rockets. You're testing ways of doing things. Sooner or later, that all comes down to like 20, 30, 40 years from now. We're going to say, we got a lot of practice in this. Let's try this asteroid.
We're going to come up with great solutions to problems we can't even imagine now by doing this. I am totally on board with that. But
why isn't that why doesn't that have anything to do with the economy? I'm
not saying it doesn't have anything to do with it, but there's a huge difference between something relating to economics and accounting and an economic justification for something. And by an economic justification in typical organizational management, what we're talking about is profit.
Producing a good or service that you can sell on the open market and make profit from. Yes.
Yeah.
Return on investment.
I'm not even going to be that restrictive. I'm going to say it. However you get it. Whether I don't. One of the things that in analysis you want to spend a lot of time on is your why. They have this asking your 5 whys. So that you get very clear on exactly the benefit that you want, rather than going to how is it going to be done? And so, how the profit or how the financial gains are realized, I would try and avoid that, because if it's an economic justification, we want basically that comes down to profit, and I'm even willing to be flexible on that. But at some point,
there is no immediate ideas for profit.
Doesn't have to be immediate. It could be super long term.
That's the whole point. The point is that so some businessman has this idea that he might want to try and expand his business into mining asteroids or even the moon or whatever. Tomorrow it's not going to be possible, but we have to try it first. We have to go there and figure this out, and then over the years it will become economical. In other words, you can't just go from 0 to 100 and nothing flat. You have to go there and do these things first. So in the future, thinking ahead, in order to be able to do those things in the future. Especially if the guy is young, if he's in his 50s or 60s, he's probably never going to see it, and he'll have to beget some sons or something to carry on the business.
I think we had this discussion actually a number of episodes ago about how you bootstrap the economy in space. Once you have an economy in space, then you will have killer apps we haven't thought
activity.
Of yet. Yeah. Well, rocket fuel is the vision of companies like Planetary Resources, right? That you can go
Deep Space Industries, yeah.
Yeah, you can go and mine, water basically out of an asteroid and turn that into rocket fuel. Now, right now, the only people that are willing to pay for rocket fuel are on Earth. But once you have a space economy, that rocket fuel becomes valuable without any reference to Earth. Its ability to move around and move materials and resources, within the space economy. And in fact, so it's kind of like, the fledglings, they sort of start messing around outside of Earth's control, and eventually they become to where they have their own world and their own economy and their own trade. And all that is independent of can we sell it back to Earth? But right now, you have to ask the question, what can we sell back to Earth? Because that's where the capital is going to come from. But people don't realize how much the world has turned upside down in the last 20 years. When you looked at the top capitalized companies 20 years ago, none of the top 5 were even existed back then that are now. Right now it's Apple, number 1, right? Then Alphabet, which is Google, essentially, number 2. I think Alibaba might be 4th, and I think 3rd one is Microsoft. Well, Microsoft existed 20 years ago, but what's happened is the world has turned upside down. Brand new companies have come in who are not drilling for oil or making steel or running banks. They are doing something else entirely.
But they may turn out to be ephemeral. We don't know yet.
Well, Apple's worth nearly $1 trillion now on the market.
But they have so little imagination; they're just sitting on it rather than investing in it.
Well, no, they do. They
could put a rocket on the moon themselves if they want.
They could. They have enough money in Bahamian banks to fund Elon Musk's entire Mars program.
There's a great interview I watched between the Eric Schmidt. Is he the Google guy? And who's the venture capitalist who spoke at the Republican convention? Peter
Diamandis?
Thiel?
No. What was that? You remember, Buck?
Thiel?
Yeah, Peter Thiel. There was a great debate, a discussion between Peter Thiel and Peter Thiel really held Eric Schmidt's feet to the fire and said, "You're sitting on all this money and you have no idea what to do about it. You're not a technology company anymore. You're just an advertising company." And I think he's right. I think these tech giants, they got in, they made a killing, they're sitting on a ton of money, and everybody talks them up like they're these geniuses, but they basically, the only one who has any ideas is Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos.
Google does fund a lot of research and development.
And the Google Lunar X Prize.
Oh, well, not way beyond that. I mean, they do. They're involved in all kinds of things.
They are involved in space. That's what I meant.
Oh, they are. Yes, and they could easily. And they have the ability to pull the trigger on billions going into something like planetary resources when the time is right for that. It's not yet. I mean, planetary resources is still, kind of ticking their toe in the water. But what's happening with my point is that the wealth that is out there, extra governmental wealth. I mean, our current GDP for 2017, just in the United States, about almost $20 trillion. Right? The federal budget is about $5 billion, something like 4 or 5 billion. The wealth that's out there is starting to dwarf the government. There's a big debt, yes, but that aside, I think that we have so much capital and energy, and we have all these emerging countries coming out of poverty with people who have skill and energy and education. We have the ability to do this for a lot smaller proportion of our wealth than we had in the 1960s. Much, much smaller. In the 60s, for us to put a colony on the moon would have been a massive undertaking. It was possible, but with Vietnam going on, there was no way to organize the political resources. But that would have been a government program that would have, return in terms of science return for the dollar would have been pathetic. And it's something Freeman Dyson has argued is that you look at the space programs we've done in the past, the science return per dollar varies all over the place, and it's usually the cheaper programs that produce better science. And for example, look at all the science you got at Kepler. Kepler was not a big flagship program. It was a little space telescope, not even a big one. It didn't cost a ton of money, and the list, and there's a long list of things like that. So But the wealth we have now in the private sector, and not just in the U.S., in Asia, in Europe, all over, and soon I think in South America and Africa as well, we're going to see a lot more of this. It's so great that people are going to be like Apple, sitting on billions, tens of billions of dollars, and saying, "What do we do with all this money?" And it's not going to be just, well, what return on investment can we get because this year or next year? Because frankly, they're already getting that. And the pressure is going to be there to push it forward, to push it outward. And
I completely agree with everything you've said, but I think there's also a human dimension that is only obliquely related to all the concerns that you just rightly underlined. And if you will allow me to quote a couple of lines from Shakespeare, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in misery. Apollo was undertaken, even though the Vietnam War was going on, it was still, people were still very, very optimistic about technology at the time. And they were, at the same time we were building the SST, and the Russians built the Konkordsky, Tupolev 144, I think it was. And these people just, that doesn't seem to be the temper of our civilization today. We are richer, we are more comfortable, people are better fed. This is Steven Pinker's line about, people tend to be very apocalyptic about the present, but people are doing quite well when you look at the numbers. But Apollo may have been that moment in history, that window when things were possible. So even if we had built the moon colony at that time, when people are optimistic and wanted to push outward, maybe it would have been possible then, and it's not possible under the contemporary political climate.
Well, I don't know if the politics is in the way, or it's. I wouldn't expect the political, the governmental entities to be the chief driver here.
To what extent do you think the recent announcement that the US is going back to the moon, spurred on by the development of other nations like China, do you think that plays a role?
I think it plays a role, but I think it's more just that people looked at the budget and said, the NASA budget, like as I mentioned earlier, has not grown significantly in 30 years.
And it's spoken for. It's planned out.
Oh yeah, pretty much all the money's spoken for.
Decades ahead.
So even this thing like the Deep Space Gateway, which they're talking about, there's no money for that right now. And whatever they're thinking it's going to cost, double it.
What's the Deep Space Gateway?
Oh, it would be this thing orbiting the moon that would be kind of like the space station, but smaller. And it's sort of like a Mir. It's sort of, if you remember the Mir space station, it's about that size, and it would be orbiting the moon. They like it because the SLS can get to it and service it and get things to it. Right now, NASA does not have a lunar lander right now. And now, yes, we did build one that successfully landed in 1969. You'd think it would not be that hard, but it was really hard. What they did in 1969 was like this national stunt, being able to, and so to be able to do that, for a reasonable cost. We couldn't use any of that stuff that we landed in 1969. We couldn't. Those motors, that stuff, you can learn from it, but you can't just build it again. You have to start build new stuff.
Well, was it SpaceX? They have the rocket lander now. It's
oh yeah,
unique.
Yeah, and that is a big joker in the deck right now, because nobody thought you could do that just 5 years ago.
It was like old sci-fi where you see on where you see on the sci-fi.
Oh, wait till this Falcon Heavy launch later this month. If assuming is successful, which it's a big if, but if it is successful, you'll have 2 boosters coming back simultaneously to the Cape and landing just landing right next to each other, and then a third one landing on a barge out of the Atlantic.
I mean, certainly they could use that new technology to create a lander for the moon.
Oh, creating a lander for the moon, the technology, the problems were all solved 50 years ago. The problem, it's not, it's just that you have to build that stuff and it's expensive. What you need to build a lunar lander is a big engine that's throttleable, and most of the engines we build are not throttleable. And I think that the lunar lander one was 10-to-1 throttle. You could reduce the thrust by a factor of 10. That allows you to sort of set it down gently, so you don't have to just. Now, but what SpaceX has done is they've figured out this hover slam thing where they can, today's computers are so much better. You can come down harder and just stop right at the surface. So, but yeah, I mean, what SpaceX has done with their booster recovery has been remarkable. It's a huge advance. The biggest thing is their supersonic, the ability to do a retro burn in supersonic speeds, it's amazing. But and it will help, I think, ultimately. But you still have. I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money to build a lunar lander. There's even if it's totally done by private industry, and NASA doesn't have one, and NASA doesn't even have one on the drawing boards. Now, Boeing has offered their concept, and SpaceX has a concept, and other people have concepts. But it would be. We're just talking U.S. here. It's possible that the Chinese might have a better concept. I don't know.
Chinese have just successfully tested a prototype lander that's very similar to the SpaceX Falcon 9.
Right.
Not a lunar lander. It's a reusable rocket system.
Well, they have landed rovers on the moon recently, so they have experience landing on the moon.
They're launching their Chang'e 4 relay satellite, which will go to the just beyond the moon, to the Moon L2 point, act as a relay for their mission to the far side next year.
Yeah, I'm surprised we haven't got one of those, but because we haven't got anything going on the far side, so we don't need it. But that's something that I've been actually trying to push. But if you don't have the NASA budget to say we're going to the far side, then it will never happen.
A radio telescope as well, or a prototype, a low frequency radio receiver. Which
that's another thing. The far side is so much different than the facing side. That there's quite a bit of exploration to be done there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could do a lot of exploration on either side, but yeah, the far side is different.
NASA identified the lunar South Pole Aitken Basin as one of their top science priorities for exploration.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. But again, there's no money to go look there. So that's why I'm saying, you take guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who are saying, damn it, I'm going to do this. And you can come along if you want, and we will be happy to have your funding and your support and your assistance, but we're going to do it anyway. And SpaceX is a private company. It has a large number of very wealthy investors, including Musk himself. But it is now, I think last I checked, the company was valued about $50 billion. It's not chump change. And there are, and compare that to, say, the valuation of Apple, which is now sitting around $900 billion. The money's there. We could do for $50 billion. You could build a Marriott on the moon. and
I just thought of someone that does have a lunar lander. There is a lunar lander. SpaceIL, the Israelis, have their Google Lunar X Prize.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
In an advanced stage of construction.
Yeah.
They've booked their ride to the moon with SpaceX, but I think they're around $7.5 million short of funding.
Oh.
Which is unfortunate because the deadline, the current deadline for winning the Google Lunar X Prize runs out at the end of March. So I think Google are going to have to extend the deadline. It would be a really big shame if nothing becomes no one wins.
Yeah.
No one wins the prize. That everyone loses.
Right.
If no one wins the prize, it's because they didn't make the prize big enough. It was attractive enough, people would make an effort to win it.
Well, you make the prize, but you got to expect people to put their own money in, and it's not about making a profit, right? It's just
games will be books.
Yeah, I mean, when Virgin won their, well, it wasn't Virgin, that was Space Composites won their X Prize. They spent way more money than they got out of the prize, but it was well worth it for them.
But the prize has got to be worth something.
Oh, it's got to be worth something. Yeah, the more it's worth, the better. But
no, I meant just the fact that we have the engineering team that was best in the world in this competition.
That's true. And the Israelis have always punched above their weight. But I've heard Air Force guys say they took our planes and made them way better.
Which one? The F-16?
All of the ones that we've supplied. But by the way, we have 2 live viewers, and if you want to make a comment or question, Adam is watching that.
Waving. Yep.
So by all means, feel free to use the chat on the right side of the screen, and it's good to have. The last time we really got any good stuff was when we had Eva Bobbin in. Adam was there for that too, and we got some good questions. And
I'm sure those 2 viewers aren't me and Adam.
No, not me.
Oh, we're down to 1. We scared 1 away. Okay, no, back to 2.
Back down to me.
Nick, why Julius Caesar?
That was the quote that came to mind. It's also one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. I know it better than most. I know it better than any play except Hamlet, I guess.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say I'm a big Hamlet fan.
It's Mike. Mike Bowler's watching.
Oh, hello, Mike. Yeah.
Mike is our viewer.
Yeah, Mike does a fairly frequent podcast called The Skeptic's Guide to Conspiracy. If you want to wallow around the world of dark nonsense, Mike's the expert.
There are always new conspiracy theories appearing.
Oh yeah, and he comes up with stuff that I just can't believe. but he digs around and
I'm dying to visit I'm dying to visit the meeting of these. There's a Denver-based Flat Earth Society that meets in Denver, and I would just be thrilled to go and talk to some of these people.
There's a podcast. There's a podcast called Ona, Ross, and Carey, where they go out and do stuff like that, and then report back on their podcast. And they did spend several weeks with Flat Earth people. Went to a number of meetings and reported back. So
how do you spell that? How do you spell their names?
Ross and Carey. Just look ONRAC ONRCpodcast.com, I think is. Yeah.
I'm glad you're thrilled, because if it were me,
they did 11 episodes on Scientology. to give you an idea of what where they actually went and participated in Scientology, just to give you an idea of what they do. They're brave. They're very.
If it were me, and the flat earthers were, and myself were the only people left on the planet, I would still walk the other way. I'd rather stay alone than go visit them.
Really? Yeah. You don't think that cosmology is interesting?
No, it's not.
It's interesting from a
listen to the Ross and Carey stuff. It's not interesting. It's all conspiracy stuff. It's
yeah. Well,
extremely religious.
From what I gather of it, they do think there does seem to be this general idea that we're living in a dome that it is a conspiracy to keep people believing that they're on a round planet. I'm not sure. I guess they think maybe it's just to maintain control, and it's all encompassing. I haven't really had the chance to kind of question and draw out the details. I'm sure there's lots of books that if I really wanted to, I could,
No, it's mostly YouTube videos. I'm sorry to tell you.
Isn't it just geocentrism?
No, it's not just geocentrism. It's flat Earth.
Yeah, there are people who believe that we are living on a disk that is inside a dome, very much like the Old Testament cosmology.
Yeah, but these people don't seem able to get past the idea that they're so very special. The Earth must be some magical place.
Well, no, it's worse. It's way worse than that, Adam. It's
stupidity is what it is.
No, it's not stupid. It's not just stupidity. It
burns me.
There's the conspiracy that you'd have to have for that to be true is so massive that you have to feel like you're special. You have to have this kind of
put them all on a rock and send them someplace.
I think if you want to understand it better, I just put the URL in the chat, by the way.
Thanks.
Buck.
Yeah. Thank you.
These young people are amazing. They joined the Mormon Church just to see what that was like. They're no longer welcome at the Church of Scientology, apparently. But
and I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, but they did like 11 episodes on Scientology. They've done everything, and they went to the Raelian meetings. They've been to UFO conferences.
The Raelians.
They joined the Raelians.
Who are they?
You don't want to know.
It's something spacey.
Yeah, Rael is he's a contactee, which is an old-fashioned thing that he revived. In the 50s, there were a lot of people that said that they were in contact with the space aliens, or the Space Brothers. And
that's the Raelian thing, right?
Well, the Rael decided he was in contact with the space aliens, and that he had a special message for mankind, and so he started this cult, which is the Raelians. And Ross and Carey actually went and joined the Raelians.
I have to admit that I started a cult with a friend of mine from the North Texas Church of Free Thought. And we decided that what we would do is just start this thing. We called it Vendani, and we kept it pretty vague, kind of new age psychic thing, and it was frightening how quickly we got adherents.
And you failed to exploit that for your personal profit. I'm disappointed in you.
Yeah, why aren't you a billionaire?
I wasn't profiting financially.
Yeah, well,
I'm not going to say I'm not going to say there was no profit involved, but
well, the Church of the Subgenius is my favorite, but
okay.
They had a lot of fun. They had more fun with it. They made money, but they had fun with it.
But we are followers, male or female?
Yes.
Both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they were. And the guy that I was working with was a science news reporter, newscaster.
Well, he should know better.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure he did. He just didn't do better.
Well, yeah, he did. He was a super fast typist. Really, he could punch out text pretty fast, and we would be batting these ideas back and forth about what we should add to the doctrine, and boy, I wish I had that material now, because some of it was probably half decent.
Well, I mean, did you pursue Slack? That's what I want to know.
What's that?
The pursuit of Slack. That's the subgenius
Reference.
Yeah. I'll just put a link in the show notes. You got to look up the Church of the Subgenius, the best joke religion ever. Quite a few adherents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where are we? Well, see, we have been recording for about 85 minutes, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. We did not solve the problem of lunar exploration or colonization, which is, once again, to our listeners, a huge disappointment. We completely failed to put a ribbon around the whole problem. Which, I'm sure.
Well, that's only because we maintain some democratic norms and people have the ability to speak and to differ. All we'd have to do is introduce a totalitarian structure, and we would have perfect concord.
Yes, well, that's that's why I often call things like Dyson spheres Stalinist, because I think you could only build them if no one was allowed to disagree.
Yeah, our architecture people sometimes refer to Stalinist gigantism for those huge palaces of culture and the big industrial projects built during the Magnitogorsk sort of the Stalinist era.
Yeah, well, to me, bottom up is a lot more interesting than top down, but it's also vastly more difficult to predict. So anyway, we'll go around. Do we have Patrick back with us yet? Yes, Patrick, you're there.
Yes, he's back.
Okay.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, we're going to do one more round. Everybody gets to one last chance to opine, and then we will wrap it up. So let's start with, on left to right to my screen, actually the first one to show up here was Adam Smith.
Going back to the moon is just a no-brainer for me. There are lots of good reasons for doing it. One, we can. Two, it will provide a valuable test for all the technologies we're going to need to go to Mars and elsewhere. There are economic reasons for going and mining helium-3, making rocket fuel, and it will be really exciting and interesting, and I'll look forward to watching developments. I really do hope we get a lunar base. That's what I would like to see, a scientific base on the far side of the moon. I don't think that's likely to happen in the next decade, but let's see.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Buck? No? Okay. Any last?
Okay. I love the idea of a lunar base. I got to admit, I was pretty skeptical about the lava tubes, but those pictures are really compelling. Nick, thanks for that. Among other usual highlights that you always provide on these shows. Whenever you're there, I feel fortunate to be here as well. I think that there is a potential economic case to be made for the rocket fuel and the other activities. I don't think we have those. I don't think we have what can be called an economic case, but I am very much I feel that the main draw for me on this is emotional. I think it's an inspiring goal. I think that it's inspiring to a large percentage of people, and that democratic, if we have well-functioning democratic structures, then a certain percentage could be set aside for things that are nothing more than inspiring examples of what we can accomplish that is noble and aspirational, as opposed to just putting everything into minimizing how much stuff sucks and reducing the amount of suckiness on Earth. We can also provide this what the Romans called magnificence, and so there's the charity end of public benefit and magnificence. And I would like to see that. And I think with additional planning, we may be able to present a roadmap for that economic case. And I would love to see that when it gets done. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. And Patrick.
Yeah, of course. Anybody who's listening to this knows already that I'm all for going to the moon first. But just to slightly steer the subject off slightly, it's still about the moon. I just want to let any listeners know that this month there's going to be a blue moon. A blue moon is simply a term they use for 2 full moons in 1 month. So we already had the full moon. In fact, it was a supermoon on the 1st, and there's going to be another supermoon. Now dubbed the blue supermoon on the 31st. So this happens when the moon is at perigee, and it can happen, either in a new moon or a full moon. To shorten my little trivia, it also has to do with whether or not you get a total solar eclipse or a total or not a total, like an annular, depending on how far away the moon is from the Earth. Its relative size seeming smaller or bigger. But take a look at Wikipedia if I didn't explain enough. But there you have it.
So can I just add, it's a total lunar eclipse for people in Eastern Asia, Australia.
Is it?
So they on the January the 31st, they'll actually have a super blue blood moon.
Yes, that's right. That's right. The 31st is going to be a lunar eclipse. I didn't know that. I didn't know it was going to be in Asia though.
I think
yeah,
Hawaii and Alaska might have an eclipse as well.
That's very interesting. Could you imagine a supermoon being blood red? What a spectacular sight that would be.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see the pictures at the end of this month.
Okay, and finally, Nick Nielsen.
I agree with Buck that the economic case hasn't been made, and I'm very sympathetic to his persistently trying to get to the bottom of that, if we can call it a problem. I'm not sure if it's a problem or it's an opportunity. But I think that we can break it down. I was thinking while we were talking that we can break it down into there's 3 potential arguments for a financial case or an economic case. All are inconclusive and involve unknowns at the present time. But there's the potential of a profit, either good or service available in space. 2, the insurance angle, and 3, the R&D angle, things you could do in space that you might be able to later parlay into a profit-making enterprise, but you would still have to do the R&D first, so there'd have to be an upfront investment. And I think the case could be made with a careful study of these, but the one crucial element is that we have to stretch out, to make any of it make sense, we have to stretch out the investment timeline. So the VC timeline of getting in and getting out and getting rich within 3 years, that doesn't fit this model at all. I do think that once the civilization gets sufficiently large and is sufficiently long-lived, that it can start stretching out investment timelines and start thinking in terms of 50 years or 100 years. And I think that's what we have to, before a company starts saying, okay, we'll invest a few $1 billion up front in some R&D, and our either by that time we're going to be so long lived we'll be able to make the profit ourselves, or our grandchildren will make the profit, and that's a good thing and we're okay with that.
Okay,
that's my thoughts on that.
I think that's something we need to hammer out even more in the future. So thanks everybody. This has been the Unseen Podcast, episode 85. I think we talked about the moon once or twice. And there'll be links in the show notes to everything that people on this panel want us to link to. Even the Church of the Subgenius. And which, by the way, is should check out. It's pretty funny. We will be back in in 2 weeks. There's another one in work. And then right now the plan is to do another episode 1 week after that, because I want to skip my 60th birthday I don't want to be doing podcasting on my 60th birthday. So I'll be doing we'll just do a little bit of a skip there. And then so there will be 3 episodes in January. And so it's what is it? It's minus 12 degrees centigrade here right now. So I'm gonna go get under a blanket. If you want to know more about this podcast or anything else that we've done in the past that are 84 episodes, go to unseenpodcast.com. It's all there. If you want to communicate with us, you can email unseenpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to be on the panel, you can. Again, go to unseenpodcast.com for more information, or email, and we'll let you know how you can do that. It's really not that complicated. We're always looking for new panelists, and I would like to see lots more new panelists in 2018. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. So until then, good night.